Hi everyone, my name is Aaron and today I'm going to be talking about cast iron. I've been cooking with cast iron for over 5 years now, almost exclusively, and it's one of my favorite ways to cook food. It's super durable, holds heat very well, and emits heat higher off the pan than a lot of other stuff. It will also last you probably longer than you'll be alive if properly taken care and seasoned for. It might not be as flawlessly non-stick as Teflon is, but when properly taken care of, it'll be pretty darn close and you won't really notice much of a difference. A problem with a lot of newer cast iron is that it has kind of a bumpy surface, and that's a result of modern production methods where it's not polished and sandblasted at the end, but with a little bit of elbow grease and work, you can get a new cast iron to be as smooth as a vintage cast iron. And today, I'm going to be going through the process with you of taking this new 5-quart double Dutch oven I got from Lodge and sand it down and season it so it works like my other pans. Now before we get to sanding down a new cast iron, I want to show you the end goal of having a properly seasoned and sanded cast iron. A cast iron over time will develop this nice black patina that's actually a plasticized layer of oil. A nice test I have for seeing how well a cast iron is seasoned is by running it underwater and seeing it just all come right off. Some droplets will stay on there and that's not really a big deal, but this is a good test to see just how hydrophobic your cast iron is. You might see that it's not flawlessly bump-free and there's a little bit of scaling around the side, but it still cooks an egg, no problem with no sticking. So I'm going to show you how to do that with a brand new cast iron. So here I've got the top of the double Dutch oven. It's pretty coarse. It's actually kind of like sandpaper and it's the same throughout the inside of the skillet. I'm not really going to concern myself with the outside so much because with a good little seasoning of oil in the oven, that'll be fine. It's the inside that I really want to be as non-stick as possible. So in order to sand it down, there's a lot of ways you can do it. What I'm going to be using today is a random orbital sander, which just lets you attach these discs on Velcro and sand in circles, and it won't leave as many scratches as some other sanders, but if you want to do it by hand, you can. I'm using 60 grit, it just comes in these pack of pads. You're removing metal, so you really need a pretty hardy sandpaper grit. If I had 40, I'd probably be using that, but I have 60 and 100, so that's going to work today. I also have a sanding block that has 60 grit on it. That'll be nice for some kind of weirder corners and edges, but honestly the circular sander will do most of the job. So I just put a fresh disc of 60 grit on here, and I just took off this back attachment. This is to collect sawdust so you can hook up to a vacuum, but given that I'm working kind of a tight space here and even tighter in the Dutch oven itself, I've taken it off and it'll just be what it is in here. And you can see it has a nice black patina. This is the pre-seasoning that Lodge or pretty much any cast iron manufacturer sends it out with, and this is just really to prevent rust. I wouldn't necessarily cook on this, so I'm just going to start and kind of show you the beginning of the process and then we'll speed through it. So that's just a little bit of it, but I've already smoothed it a good amount in comparison to the black side, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump through this and sand the whole thing and speed it up for you guys so you don't have to watch a whole lot of sanding. One thing you want to watch out for with any sandpaper, the more you sand on it, the more it'll kind of break down the little bits of sandpaper that are actually knocking off the particles. You'll have to change discs pretty regularly because now, even after this little bit of sanding, this 60 grit has kind of gone up a bit, especially around the sides where I'm really pressing in. So just keep an eye out and change it pretty frequently. Back to it.
Never knew you loved me. I never knew your love had an open heart. This crazy thing is funny. And now you know just how far away.
So if I'll be honest, the sides of the pan are the hardest part of all this. So I really try and devote most of my energy to this flat area since this will be the main area that it's living in. If you're doing something on the sides that has a liquid, it's less likely to stick. I'm really focusing most of my energy here, half because it's the main cooking area, half because I don't want to hate myself and do the sides.
Whatever you say, whatever you do, as long as you keep.
The edges have taken a bit off, the bottom is pretty darn smooth. Again, we're not talking about, absolute glass here. We're talking about an improvement, and really the bottom is where most of your stuff is going to come into contact, and that's where this extra ease of seasoning will really be most apparent. Kind of the same story here. This one has some more cross marks from when I went across it with the blocks. You know what? I'm pretty content with this. And I'm content with that. The edges are okay, the bottoms are fantastic, and with some seasoning, we'll be killing. So let's go head back inside. First of all, I have 2 different sponges on hand at all times. One is my normal dishwashing sponge that has soap in it, and then I have a separate cast iron sponge that doesn't have any soap in it. I'll wash it once in a while with soap to kind of clean out the sponge itself, but this has no soap. And this is what I use for maintenance on my pans. So I'm going to show you that first. So right here I've got one of my cast irons. And after cooking, I'll let it cool down a little bit just because I don't want to burn a sponge or anything like that. What I'll do is I'll put it under relatively warm running water, and if there's a lot of stuff built up on it, I'll let it sit for a while to kind of loosen the food or whatever material's in there, and I'll just take the rough side of this, give it a good scrub, and if there's parts that are particularly tough, you may have seen this on the internet, but I use coarse salt to kind of act as an extra abrasive agent. So I'll just throw a little bit on there, a couple little granules, and I'll use that sponge again with just a bit of water. I don't want the salt to dissolve in the water. So say there was some like hard built up stuff there, I'll trap the salt under my sponge and just kind of scrub. This will take away any gunk that's on the pan or heavy food scraps without destroying the seasoning. I'm gonna wash off my salt. This pan was already clean. And you'll see it's just about as hydrophobic as it was before. Then what I'll do is I'll take this over to the stove, heat it up over high heat until all the water droplets have evaporated, turn off the burner, and then I'll just rub a thin layer of oil on top. Olive oil is my oil of choice, so that it's nice and glistening again, but that'll clean it up. Now, for my recently sanded pan, this has a bunch of iron filings on it. So for once, I actually want to use a ton of soap and a ton of water on this, both on the inside and the outside. So all I'm going to do is some nice hot water. Already got some soap in here. Wash it down.
Still laugh at my own jokes, still sing a couple wrong notes from
That's all washed and cleaned. So now if you look, that is not hydrophobic at all. The water's just staying on there. Might be kind of hard to see. If you look at the back, the factory seasoning is pretty hydrophobic. It's not covered in water, but it's also not repelling it as much as my seasoned cast irons. But that's why we're going to season it. So let's head to the oven. So I washed these pans down. I gave them a good towel dry. And now I'm going to set my oven to broil. And while it's heating up, I'm going to give a nice generous coating of oil to the top, back, side, handle, every part of the cast irons. You can use fancier oils like grapeseed or linseed or whatever seed. The only reason I'm using olive oil is because when I first started cooking on cast iron, I found that it worked great, and here all these years later, I'm still making good food on it, so it hasn't proved me wrong. So do whatever you want. So now the pan's completely coated in olive oil. You can see it's nice and shiny. Throw this guy in there upside down. If you're really concerned about oil drip, you can set a layer of aluminum foil underneath. My oven's kind of a lot right now because I've been making a lot of pizza, so I'm not going to concern myself with that. But up to you. I'm going to leave it in there for 1 hour, but before I set the timer, I'm going to finish up the bottom of the Dutch oven and throw it in there as well. Get it all nice and juicy. And that looks pretty good. A little rough around the edges, but it'll make some good food. I suppose that would be my tinder bite. Set a timer for an hour. That'll be about it. So I just pulled both the top and the bottom of the Dutch oven out. You can see there's some spots in there. And that's not really much to worry about. That's just uneven drip points where the oil collected and fell off. And 1 or 2 cooks and that'll take care of itself. You can see it's still pretty hot, so the olive oil that I put on is kind of smoking. If you really want to get this out in one go, you can do multiple seasonings. So I just rub it again, stick it in the oven after it's cooled down a bit, and that'll do it. But for me, this is fine. It's going to look good. It's going to season well. And if you see the outside, it's already that nice kind of glossy brown, glossy black that the pans you saw earlier were. So there's really not much to do there. Just every time after you finish cooking, you want to rub down not only the inside, but also the outside, just to kind of protect it from rusting. So that's about it for sanding and seasoning your cast iron. Remember that it's a gradual process and it's a little more work than using, say, stainless steel or a Teflon pan, but that little bit of extra work will yield a really great pan that you'll be able to use for years and years. Just remember to let it cool down a little bit after it's cooked, scrub it off with a sponge that has no soap, heat it up so the water evaporates, oil it, and you'll be ready for your next use. And if you keep doing that over and over, you're gonna have a nice, almost non-stick pan that you'll be able to use for a long time. If you'd like to see more of this kind of content, let me know, and thank you again for watching.